Welcome to Folk and Fairy Tales. I'm your host, Dark, and tonight we will be on the plains of the Americas with living ghosts and mischievous monsters, chilling American Indian stories written by Dan SasuWeh Jones, also illustrated by Weshoyet Alvert. Tonight, we will be telling the story of the Deer Hunter. Told by Dan SasuWeh Jones, Ponco, while visiting the river people. And there's an illustration, please, if you would. Our Ponca elders have long taught us that our present is connected to our past and to our future. They have also taught us to read signs that might tell us about the future. We believe that animals such as deer communicate with one another, not by the sounds alone, but by sight, and by a silent language. The spirit world, our culture says, also communicates with us by signs. Sometimes the signs are so obvious that they stop us in our tracks and make us carefully consider our future actions. And we begin. The Deer Hunter. My friend Sonny and I were young men, hunting for the tribe. We fed many families, some too old to hunt and some too young. It's not like the tribe paid us to do this. It's something all young men do. It's how we're taught. You take care of those who have a hard time taking care of themselves. It's what makes a tribe work. One summer, I was a guest of Sonny and his tribe, who called themselves the River People, far from my own tribe. For the 6 months I lived with them, I camped on their wooded land near their home. They treated me as their own. Sonny's best friend was Sam. The two grew up together and shared hundreds of hunting stories. Sam lived across the reservation with his own family, but was related to Sonny's family and spent a good deal of time there when he and Sonny were not hunting. Once Sonny introduced us, Sam and I became friends right off. And many times, it was just Sam and me who would go out hunting. We had to be very careful what deer we would take. If we delivered to the elders the meat of a big deer, like a big healthy buck with large antlers, the elders would chastise us. The big deer were breeders, so the old folks wanted them to be left alone. Besides, the meat was tough, and its wild flavor was too strong. They wanted the weaker animals, the very young or very old. It was an ideal way to keep the herds healthy, so we always hunted in balance with nature, no different than the way wolves would hunt. It required good judgment on the hunter's part. It was one of those times when Sam and I were both looking at a young deer well within range. I was lying flat, and so was he. I looked over my shoulder at him to confirm that this was indeed the right animal to take, and he gave me a nod. I always said a prayer as I sighted in on the animal and controlled my breathing. I was aiming just below its ear, high up on its neck. If the bullet was true, it would be an instant kill shot. No suffering. The animal would not even know. it was hit. In another second, I squeezed the trigger, and with a loud explosion, the deer folded, dropping straight to the ground. A perfect shot. I turned to Sam, who appeared to still be holding his rifle at the ready, and I said, "Got him. Clean shot." Sam looked at me puzzled, saying, "I didn't hear you shoot." "But I got him." I was as puzzled as he was. "I didn't hear you shoot," I said. As we drove our truck to pick up the deer, we argued. When we reached the deer, we paused, and both said a prayer for the animal's spirit in thanks for its sacrifice. Then we looked carefully and found 2 entrance wounds, one almost exactly on top of the other. "What are the odds of this happening?" Sam said, astounded. I added, "And the reason I didn't hear you, and the reason you didn't hear me, is because we shot at the same time. The exact same time." Back at Sonny's house, we cut up the deer, and Sam divided some meat for Sonny's family, and then drove off to deliver most of it to the tribal families he knew needed food. The next morning, I saw Sonny drive up to the camp, and I went out to meet him. "Morning, Sonny. How about a cup of coffee?" He didn't get out of his truck, and his head was down. He looked up at me. His eyes were blood red, and he had been crying. "What's wrong, Sonny?" I wasn't ready for his words. "Sam was in a wreck last night, and he didn't make it. I'll be with his family for the next few days. Sam would want you to come to his funeral. I'll come back to you when the time is right. You'll be ready?" "Yes," I replied. "Of course, Sonny. If there's anything I can do, just let me know, okay? And Sonny, I'm so sorry." Sonny left to be with his friends and relatives, and all that day I couldn't help but think of the incidents Sam and I had had with the deer. Was it related in some way? If so, in what way? Later that evening, I decided to walk over to the main house where Sonny and his family lived. It was a good half-mile through the woods, but it was a clear, warm night with just enough moonlight to see pretty well. I wanted the time to think, and I needed to understand how this terrible thing had happened. Maybe the family had more information by now. When I reached the house, Sonny's truck had returned from Sam's house. I went inside, and I immediately sensed something was very wrong. Even beyond Sam's tragic death, the few people I saw were the oldest members of Sonny's family, and a look of shock filled their faces. Then I heard it, a violent sound coming from down the hallway, loud banging, someone screaming. "Sonny?" As I walked towards Sonny's room, his door opened, and his grandmother stood in the doorway. What I saw behind her, I will never forget as long as I live. Sonny, on his bed, screaming in convulsions. Violently, he was being bent in half from the waist and raised up from the bed to a sitting position, then slammed back down on the bed at a speed that was impossibly fast, and then back down again, and then back down again. Shaken like a rag doll with a powerful force, caught in a tempest of anger. As his grandmother exited the room, she laid her hand directly on my chest, moving me backwards while closing the door behind her. "Oh no, dear. Oh no. You have to leave here. You shouldn't be here now." "Yes, I need to go," I said as I turned and headed to the front door. His grandmother grabbed my hand and placed something in it. Outside, I saw that it was cedar and sage tied in a bundle. On the front porch, a couple of family members had gathered. Under the porch light, Sonny's brother-in-law spoke up. "Sonny was at a ceremony for Sam. Sam's family had called in some elder medicine people because things were flying off the wall. People were being thrown to the floor. Things like that. The medicine people told the family that Sam was angry because of the way he died, so they were holding a ceremony at the body to direct his spirit, let it understand what happened to him, and help it onto its journey." The brother-in-law continued. "Sonny joined the ceremony, and during it, he got sick, real sick. He wanted to leave the circle, but the elders told him not to. He left anyway and came home, and something awful came with him." "My God," I said to myself, clutching the cedar and sage, looking into the darkness. I was having second thoughts about going alone through the woods back to my camp. But I politely turned down a ride and struck off walking. I had nothing to fear, did I? I had a flashlight with me, and it helped. But I couldn't get that picture of Sonny being pounded against his bed out of my mind. I must have been about halfway back to the camp when a horrible smell almost gagged me. I hadn't noticed that smell as I came by here not 30 minutes ago. That's when I noticed it was getting colder. Then I could see my breath, and I had chills. Suddenly, my flashlight went out. I was panicking, shaking that flashlight and hitting it against my leg until it came back on. I was still a good city block from my camp, and I wanted to run. But I knew there was a powerful force with me. Something kept telling me to pray, and I did, out loud. The words, "Something awful came with him," kept repeating in my mind. On what had been a warm, clear night, the freezing air bit at my skin, my light kept going out. And that god-awful smell, I was scared. Only a few yards from my teepee, a wind slammed me, making me fight the last few steps to the door, then whipping the door open into the air like it was trapped in a whirlwind. I grabbed the door, ducked inside, and desperately tied it down. Inside, I stoked hot coals, still in the firebox, then sprinkled cedar and sage over the coals. As the smoke rose, I felt a weight lifting from me. My teepee warmed. Outside, I could hear that the windstorm ceased. I didn't sleep that night. I just kept the fire going. And now and then, I'd burn a little more sage and cedar. Until the sun came up at last. To a very beautiful day. I made my way over to Sonny's house, and there he was, outside, walking with a cane. He looked noticeably older. "Are you okay?" I asked. "Yes, I'm fine." His voice didn't sound the same. The funeral is today. Are you going? I looked down. I don't know if Sam told you about the deer we shot the day of the accident. We hit it in the same place, at the same time. I don't know what that means, if anything, but I do believe things like that happen for a reason. And I do believe it has connected us in some way. So, if you don't mind, I'll stay here. I'll stay right here. And that, my fellow listeners, dreamers, and story seekers, is the Deer Hunter. Now, the like button does not always receive the love that it should from everyone. So, if you could, buy a subscription service to some local flower delivery and have flowers pretty much every week sent to the likes button, the like button's home or workplace or wherever they are. Just something nice, something sweet. Doesn't have to be too expensive, but enough to show your love. And with that, I'll see you next time. Dream well. The hour grows late, and this video to a close. Good night.